So hello everyone, a lot of people out there that I recognize. For those that don't know me, my name is Denis. I'm the IT director for the Eclipse Foundation, and I am not here to talk about Kubernetes too much. If you're expecting a full-blown how to get Kubernetes running and how to make it work, sorry to disappoint, that's not going to happen. I tried to find a funny title for my talk. With Docker and Kubernetes, this is not your grandparents' infrastructure anymore. I consider myself one of the grandparents. I was, in the Eclipse community since 2004, so it's been 14 years. I'm not quite as old as Gunnar in the back, but almost. So when I talk about the grandparents, I'm including myself in that, and Danny Magert and Gunnar and a few of you out there. The IT team at the Eclipse Foundation is a very modest team of 6 people, very talented people. I do not do all this alone, although I'd like to take full credit for everything. There are 3 of us here at EclipseCon. If you have any questions or you need any support, you've probably sent us bugs or sent us an email to webmaster@eclipse.org. Please hunt down the folks that are here. I think Eric is somewhere here, and Mikael is sitting in the back, and Fred is also sitting in the back, and they're going to be they're reading my talk later on. So the list of services that we provide to the community nowadays is quite exhaustive. If you've been to our website, that's not the only thing that we do. So if you've been to eclipse.org before, you get a nice web page. That's part of what we do. We do a whole lot more than that. Everything from builds to marketplace client to a wiki to the info center help. But your grandparents did not have all of that. In fact, they didn't have a whole lot. They had a code repository, they had a website, if they made one, and not much more. There's kind of a big difference there. What did your grandparents used to do for code? It was quite simple back then. They had a CVS repository, and yeah, that was pretty much it. Nowadays, we've got code review tools like Gerrit and pull requests. But this is not what I want to talk about, because we've had that for a while. When you talked about security, your grandparents thought that security was just an MD5 sum away. That's all they had. Nowadays, we have better checksums, and we have digital code signing. Later on, I'm going to talk about the Eclipse Common Build. It's essentially a set of build services that the foundation provides to all of its projects. And not only is it a build CI/CD, it's also full signing, digital identification, and so on. Something is paused. What did your grandparents call a build back in the day? It's quite comical, and it was really a lot of black magic to the builds. Essentially, we'd write a bunch of Ant scripts. We'd have them on our local laptops if we had laptops, or we'd store them on a corporate server somewhere and, hey, that's our build. One of the big problems, I guess, with that is that the build was not really visible to anybody. So that's the little person in the corner there, kind of wondering what's going on with the build. If anybody tried to build the platform, for instance, back then, it was really a lot of black art, and the process was not as visible and open as we'd hope it to be. Nowadays, we have tools like Maven and Tycho, and we store all of these descriptors in the code repositories or in release engineering repositories. We have Jenkins that's open to everybody, so anybody can just access your build and, with a few steps, kind of try to run it if you've documented the build process. Recently, we've added Kubernetes and Docker, because everybody else is doing it. I've been in the industry for a fairly long time, and there's a certain amount of technology that comes in very fast, and everybody hears about it, and it's great, and before you know it, that technology is gone. when Kubernetes started hitting the scene, I was kind of apprehensive. I'm all about everything Linux and C groups and all that stuff, but I was just a bit concerned. But when I saw that the fast adoption of Kubernetes, we figured we didn't really have much choice. We had to do this. But that wasn't the only reason. The reason we did it is because we had scalability issues. When you have 200 projects running a build, half of them probably running a build all at the same time, it does cause a concern for scalability. Where do you pull out all of these processing resources? You can't just make them up. But your grandparents did not have that. A few years ago, several years ago actually now, we decided to come up with something that we called JIP, so a Jenkins instance per project. I remember talking with some people at EclipseCon back in 2012 who just said I was nuts. I was just crazy to run a Java process 100 times and toss that on a bunch of servers and let those things run builds. They said you're going to need a tremendous amount of memory, you're going to need a tremendous amount of hard drive space, and they were right. I bought a lot of servers, and I bought a lot of big servers, and that's what our grandparents had, is what was on the left, a bunch of Jenkins instances running. The problem is that some of the projects running the builds, either their builds run for a very long time, or they spawn a whole bunch of threads, or they consume a whole lot of memory. So the little project that's kind of co-located on the same server as them, bam, you just can't get anything done. So what we've decided to experiment with, and that's our crack team of release engineers that is entirely sitting in this room, they said, let's do Kubernetes and let's do Jenkins on top of that, and let's give it a try. So that's kind of what we're in the process of migrating to now. We are moving from Jenkins to Jenkins, both completely different underpinnings. Rather than something that we've cobbled together and called it JIP, it's something that is more enterprise grade. I think we still do we still call it JIP? Is it still a JIP? eJIP, iJIP? We'll find a name for it. We were a bit apprehensive with Kubernetes at first because, it's new, it's moving fast, and there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And if, by the time you buy the book on Amazon on how to deploy, Kubernetes, the new edition is just right around the corner. So our friends at Red Hat, and I see there's a few of our friends here at Red Hat that are there, they kind of gave us access to OpenShift container platform, which takes a lot of the guesswork out of that. So we kind of cobbled together a sample cluster and started playing with it. And within a few months, we had an 8-node compute cluster, and that's what we've been using today. So the 12 massive servers that are currently powering our old JIP are still powering the old JIP, and we're just waiting to migrate over so that we can have a bigger compute cluster. So the big advantage to that is that rather than allocating an unknown Java process to a machine and have that Java process kind of just consume all of the machine, leaving those poor projects stranded with no resources, we'll be able to cut those machines up in smaller bite-sized chunks. And eventually we'll place some limits on those chunks. So if you're used to consuming an entire 256 gigabyte machine and just running 20 builds at the same time, do it now while you can, because that won't be possible in the near future. So this is kind of a very microscopic view of what Jenkins looks like. You can just see it on your laptop right now. If you go to jenkins.eclipse.org, it essentially looks like Jenkins. However, you're going to see a bunch of project names, and each of those links brings you to their master node on the Kubernetes cluster. We have about 200 of these Jenkins instances. Is it about 200? Now it should be more. Last I heard, we had about 180 of those individual things running on the old platform, and then we got this thing called Jakarta EE, where they said we need a whole bunch of hardware. So that came just in time, and our teams were able to spawn 30 some odd new Jenkins instances within the space of a couple of weeks. We still have a few roadblocks that are preventing us from moving the old Jenkins to the new platform. I think most of those roadblocks have been removed. We're still working with some of the early adopters. Yes, we're still working with you as the early adopter, so one day the pain will stop and it will work. But we are with your early adopters, kind of figuring out what it is that is needed to migrate from the standalone Jenkins onto the CloudBees infrastructure. And once that's done, we will publish all of our findings. We will automate as much as we can so that the transition can go from A to B as seamlessly as possible. How many of you have infrastructure on Jenkins, the old one? Anybody else? There's quite a few, you guys. Wow. Are you eager to get to something better? Or yeah. Well, you have one on each. That's kind of good. The CBI project is more than just Jenkins, though, and here's kind of what's included. I'm not going to read everything, but it does come with one Jenkins instance, the possibility of attaching countless number of agents on the outside world. One project that comes to mind is the Open, I think it's the OpenJ9 project. They have about 7 or 8 Jenkins agents running all kinds of platforms. They run that either in their infrastructure or on the cloud. So the foundation does not need to do everything for you. We can provide you with the basis and you can fill in whatever it is that you need. If you need 20 Windows machines, we just can't provide that. But we can allow you to connect to the outside world and connect those together. So you get some disk space, you get access to the download server, which sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's not. I can't always blame it on the conference Wi-Fi, especially when there's no conference. I'm plugging my colleague's talk tomorrow. I hope that you're talking about pipeline builds tomorrow, Fred. So Fred is one of our release engineers. He knows a lot more about builds than I do. And he has a talk tomorrow at 2, exactly here, Theater Stage. And he's going to be talking about, what it is that you can... Is it the other one? Oh, I'm at Theater Stage, right. So he's going to talk more in more depth about how you can do that actual migration from the older one to the newer one. But not only that, how you can improve your build process and reduce it from 18 hours per build to something like 17 and a half, or even less. So let's move on with the infrastructure. Your grandparents, poor them. They used Bugzilla. It was the bug tracker. Fortunately, nowadays, things are not better. We're still using Bugzilla. Things are a bit better because there is GitHub. So if you don't want to use Git and Gerrit at Eclipse, you can still host your project on GitHub and use the GitHub issues, the GitHub wikis, and all that fun stuff. So there is some improvement there. In terms of interfacing with our website, that's another issue. Over the years, we've had countless numbers of either third-party applications or websites that want to use the Eclipse data, so the stuff that comes from our website, either Bugzilla, user authentication, it could be lists of projects, any form of metadata that we can possibly provide. Your poor grandparents, they had to screen scrape stuff. They had to pull in HTML pages, parse the HTML, and that's if they were lucky enough to get something that was DOM compliant and actually complete. They had to screen scrape that. It was error prone. I think of some projects like the Mylan project, the error reporting project. They had to screen scrape a fair amount of data. And several years ago, what we started to do is provide API. So public REST API to be able to access that data. So if you point your browser to api.eclipse.org, you'll at least have a catalog. Now, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're not going to re-implement Bugzilla's REST API, although maybe we should. We're not going to re-implement Gerrit's REST API. They're already there. You can already use them, but they're just not all that easy to discover. So api.eclipse.org does make one central location to discover all that API. If you are thinking about integrating with the Eclipse web properties, either for authentication or for pulling any of our data, I would start here. And if we don't have API to access what it is you're looking for, no, we will not tell you who's subscribed to your mailing list. We can't do that. If there's no API available for what you're looking for, please just let us know. So that's api.eclipse.org. The other thing we've done as well is we've implemented OpenID Connect. So for authentication, so using the Google and the Facebook and the Twitter and Eclipse Foundation as an authentication source. We're not yet seeing it everywhere, so world domination has not yet completed, but maybe someday. In terms of data privacy, your grandparents had a much simpler life back in 2004, 2005. Essentially, if there was data somewhere, you supplied email addresses and you agreed to receive countless amounts of spam. That was kind of just part of the deal. But back then, there was no such thing as spam, right? If you put your email address out on a bug form or on a bug page, everything kind of just worked. So back then, the whole concept of privacy is, you know what, do the right thing and I'll do the right thing and we'll call it a day. Nowadays, with GDPR, we cannot do that. So for those of you that run services on the outside, we call them third-party services. If you have web pages that interact with the Eclipse Foundation's web properties, or if you have web pages that use the Eclipse Foundation's web properties, your project websites are an example. If you have a project virtual server, either on Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, you are possibly collecting user data. And the GDPR is not okay with that. Unless the user consents to it. You've probably seen that little cookie policy thing show up on our website and 16 billion other websites throughout the planet. It's the most annoying thing, but unfortunately it's what we have to do. And it's also something that you have to do as well if you have a project virtual server and you decide to run a web-based application. We've also authored a policy called, and I have to take a breath for this one, the Eclipse Hosted Services Privacy and Acceptable Usage Policy. That's how we've named it. And that policy aims to solve two specific issues. The first one was Google Analytics. There were a number of our projects that were embedding either our Google Analytics code in them or their own Google Analytics code in them. And when the GDPR came into effect, we simply panicked. We simply panicked and said, well, we don't know how this is going to look like, so we just pulled all of those Google Analytics codes and said, yeah, we can't allow this kind of stuff. After a lot of discussion with a lot of lawyers who gave us a lot of clues, they said Google Analytics is fine as long as you guys agree to the same terms and conditions that are put forth by the GDPR. That policy is not yet approved. It hasn't been published yet, but it is in the works to allow you to use Google Analytics. Is there anybody here that's interested in using Google Analytics on their Eclipse project? One person. Your wait is almost over, sir. There is a BOF, I believe, tonight that is hosted by my colleague, Eric Poirier. I'll be there as well. And we will be talking about the GDPR and if you have any concerns about what to do at Eclipse with regards to GDPR, that's the best place to talk about it. I am not going to read all of this, although I could. Essentially, it's just a matter of defining what the private data is and simply acknowledging that you're not going to use it, you're not going to give it, you're not going to sell it to anybody, and you will dispose of it as soon as you possibly can. And you're going to gather the minimal amount of private data that you have to. Back to infrastructure, because talking about legal is not my strong point. Project websites at Eclipse, your grandparents did that for a very, very, very long time. It was pretty much a text-based environment. Very minimal graphics, very minimal interaction with the people. Nowadays, our web developers have given us a lot of tools. One of those tools, we call it the Quicksilver Theme. The Quicksilver theme is available in a lot of language flavors, PHP, as static HTML that can be built with Hugo as part of your CI build. So we do have projects that pull a sample set of templates. They run this through Jenkins and they build it with Hugo. They pump that out to a Git repository and that goes to the website, and it makes really, really, really nice websites. So you don't have to do like your grandparents anymore. You can have a beautiful website as well. We do have I should have put the email address here on my slide, but we do have an email address to reach our web developers. It's webdev@eclipse.org. If you need help assembling your project website, if you need help creating the content, you want help with creating the Jenkins job that will actually build your website and put it on the web server, we can help you with that. If you want assistance building your corporate website because you want to make billions of dollars, our hourly rates are no, we don't do that. We should though. Another thing that we've been doing in the realm of IT, and this is a bit deep in the weeds, unless you're a network person by default, this doesn't really appeal to you. But we are replacing our content load balancers with something more modern. Every time you hit one of our popular Eclipse websites, either www.eclipse.org or the download servers or whatnot, you're hitting a piece of network hardware that is almost as old as your grandparents, actually. It's 11 years old. The Cisco gear has been phenomenal. It's been flawless, but it's time to implement something new. We're using Nginx technology to provide front-end caching for a lot of our content. Some of it is already in place, so if you hit our wiki, it's already being served by a load balancing technology that supports acceleration. The downloads area, CI, and we're not done yet. I believe Bugzilla is already under that control as well. And the advantage there for you guys, you probably get faster load times when there's no conference Wi-Fi issues. But the other advantage is that since it's more efficient on the front end, we can save some processing cycles on the back end. And if we have idle hardware that is no longer needed, well, we simply take that hardware out and we throw it back into the Kubernetes-powered build cluster. We're kind of going easy on the take servers out and put them in the build, because once we put them in the build, Karsten just eats them up and then I can't reclaim them anymore and put them back into service elsewhere. But that is happening. I know for a fact that one of our download servers, we can just pull it out, put it into the build cluster, and that'll help spread the load for builds. So looking forward, I kind of put this slide together last minute, and it hasn't been approved by my team of people who actually do things lower level than I am. We're using Kubernetes for the build cluster, but it's not the only usage for it. We have been in talks of moving a lot of our web properties to Kubernetes, either in the same cluster or in different clusters. That's just an implementation detail. As opposed to using specific virtual machines that do one purpose, that tend to get stale. So for instance, if you hit www.eclipse.org, you're hitting an old virtual machine. It's probably out of date, and it would need a good refresh. So instead of refreshing these web servers, what we're going to do is we're going to simply enable them to run in parallel on Kubernetes. So that's kind of what we're looking at as we look forward with this technology. If your grandparents would be sitting here today, and a lot of you are, I think they would be proud to see the slide full of color, the logos of the technologies that we're using. The foundation is working really hard to try to solve your problems, because in the end, you guys are the ones who are working on the cool stuff, not us. And we just want to make your lives a lot easier. So if there's anything at all that we can do, please let us know. File a bug, send us an email, tell us what we should be doing, and we'll seriously look at making that happen. I believe that I'm a bit ahead of schedule, so that gives us a bit of time for some questions. I would just like to offer a reminder. Don't forget to log into the EclipseCon website and rate your talks. And one thing that actually fooled me, and this probably just shows my ignorance, if you go to the EclipseCon website on your phone or something like that, you log in, you rate your talk, you have to hit the submit button. Hitting that little +1 or -1 bucket does not actually save your vote. You have to hit the submit button. So please rate your talks. Please give me a +1. I like those. Please rate your talks. Thank you very much. We do have some time for questions, and not only I can pass your questions along to Mikael and Fred if there are any. Karsten. It's a question and a solution right all in one. So the question was, we have this notion of flyby contributions, right? Somebody sees our code, they want to submit a patch on or a pull request, I should say, on GitHub, and they're immediately rejected because they haven't signed the Eclipse contributor agreements that are necessary to enable that. I'm not sure what it is that we can do. We can probably interface with a lot of the GitHub API. But in essence, somebody needs to sign the Eclipse contributor agreement. So definitely, can you please file a bug? Actually, I wasn't fully aware of that use case where you can just use the editor, because I mean GitHub, comes up with new tools and new API all the time. So if there's a way where we can streamline signing the ECA and saying, hey, you're contributing these 2 lines of code, would you mind reading and accepting this Eclipse committer agreement? Boom, 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 and we're done. So please file a bug. We will look into that. Anything we can do to, we know that contributions are the bread and butter of the open source project. So anything we can do, even if it's just a punctuation fix, documentation typo or anything like that, we certainly want to encourage that, and we realize that signing the ECA is a step. Were there any other questions? That's it? Well, thank you very much. Have a good lunch.